In this lesson, we're going to look more closely at some strategies for mapping and diagramming for problem framing.
The research tells us that experienced professionals spend more time understanding and defining the problem. They spend more time problem scoping and information gathering, thinking broadly about the constraints of the problem, considering assumptions and perspectives of others, and evaluating many alternatives. Undergraduate students, on the other hand, often sacrifice quality for speed, are more prone to bias, struggle to identify constraints, and consider fewer. The strategies we'll be covering in this lesson are focused on helping to make the abstract concrete. By visually representing relationships between concepts and ideas in the case of concept mapping, deconstructing and reconstructing elements to make new connections in the case of the Lotus Blossom matrix, and visually representing and narrativizing a sequence of events or ideas in the case of storyboarding. Concept maps, storyboards, and lotus blossoms are types of graphical organizers used to organize ideas and show interrelationships. They remove the barrier of writing prose in a linear fashion and allow the creator to think more freely. We can use these strategies in a number of different stages of work. We can use them before a learning module to help students reflect on what they already know or assume about a topic, such as students' mind mapping or concept mapping on giant post-its in a small group. We can do it after a learning module to help students integrate new understanding with prior knowledge, such as prompting them to repeat the activity above, revising or adding to an old map, or working individually and including concept maps in a reflective journal. Or to assess understanding, where students could create a concept map in response to a test or quiz question. Students often include more information and are better able to articulate interconnectedness in this format than in a written essay. Scholars like Novak, Gowan, and Canis have done a lot of background research into the uses of concept mapping for externalizing knowledge and argue that one of the reasons concept mapping is so powerful for the facilitation of meaningful learning is that it serves as a kind of template or scaffold to help to organize knowledge. Concept maps include nodes for main concepts, crosslinks to other concepts, and words for labeling and describing each. They are hierarchical, often moving from top to bottom or center to outer, and proximal, using clusterings, groupings to show similarity. Concept maps are both a learning tool and an evaluation tool. As learning tools, concept maps organize main concepts, give hierarchy to these concepts, and show relationships. As evaluation tools, they can evaluate students' understanding of ideas or problems, assess prior knowledge, and examine appropriate uses of terminology. The steps of the process look something like this. Start with the main concept at the top or middle of the page as a node. Write related terms below, draw crosslinks labeled with verbs to describe the relationships. Hugh Dubberly, president of Dubberly Design Office, has done extensive work into the ways that we can use concept mapping for problem framing. In contrast to the more linear approach explained previously, this approach is generative and broad and often used at the initial stage and as a means to capture a lot of components up front. Dubberly suggests that you first list items related to the main concept or problem. Then edit the list, removing terms that may be related to the topic but not necessarily to a problem per se. He then suggests defining the remaining terms, especially within problems that are new to students or technical in nature. He suggests then creating a matrix that shows the relationships of the terms by listing all of them down one side of the matrix and repeating the list across the top. The relationships between the terms is noted in the boxes where a row and a column intersect. The resulting matrix provides a checklist for building the concept map. After that, rank the terms. Decide on main branches or write framing sentences. Fill in the rest of the structure and revise. Typographic and illustrative hierarchy should be applied also as part of this structure and revision. Concept mapping is great for active learning and can be used individually or within groups for peer evaluation and review and/or for self-reflection. Concept mapping is slightly different from mind mapping in one key way. through the explicit linking of ideas that show direct relationships. Mind mapping is particularly useful for generating ideas and working in larger groups where the details and specificity of concept mapping might be less important or relative. Related to concept maps, but a little more structured, is the Lotus Blossom Matrix, which was developed by the Japanese researcher Yasuo Matsumura. The Lotus Blossom technique is a structured brainstorming exercise used to expand on a central idea or problem. It can encourage students to diligently explore one idea or facet of a problem before moving on to the next. This technique is particularly good for breaking apart problems and ideas to look at components in greater detail, to think about a problem from multiple perspectives, in combining and recombining different elements as part of the problem framing process, and or in planning out a proposal, a project, or a paper. Here is an example of the structure of the Lotus Blossom Matrix. In the very center of the grid is the main idea, and within each of the outer sections of the grid, a component of the problem or idea is further identified. For example, in planning a paper on the ethics of AI, big ideas such as surveillance, transparency, trust, and bias might be big ideas that would fill up the ABCD slots. Then, if we zoom into one section on bias, for example, might result in a further breakdown on different dimensions to the bias, like the bias is inherent in the programmer, the biases inherent in data collection methods, in historical data, in contemporary data, etc. Once these subtopics, one of these subtopics then moves into the center matrix, which ultimately becomes the scaffold for the solution, argument, or project. You can use this technique to pull out and recombine elements of the problem that might be used for practical solutions, such as in this example of students not being engaged in the classroom, or in planning out an argument. Here's an example from Professor Ann Auten, teaching professor in English at NC State, for how one student used the Lotus Blossom to plan out their argument for a paper on the impacts of technology on human knowledge. The final strategy in this lesson that uses visualization as a tool for organizing and framing problems is storyboarding. At its essence, a storyboard is a graphic organizer that plans a narrative. Storyboards are a powerful way to visually present information. In addition to telling the story itself, the linear direction of the cells of a storyboard is perfect for explaining a process and showing the passage of time. By breaking a story into linear bite-sized chunks, it allows the author or student to focus on each cell separately and without distraction. Storyboarding strategies encourage students to think about a topic using narrative, illustration, and dialogue. As a teaching tool, they can be good for encouraging interpretation, for thinking about consequences, for scenario building and analogies, and identifying key steps of a process. The steps of the process of storyboarding are first to make a shot list, which we can interpret it as key moments or steps of a process or argument, put the shots in an order, illustrate the scenes, add dialogue if appropriate, and add descriptive text that provides further information about what is happening in the scene. Some example prompts that show different approaches to storyboarding might be to storyboard the impacts of climate change on a penguin in the Arctic from the penguin's perspective. Explain why the state budget isn't getting passed. Reinterpret the major themes present in Tess of the D'Urbervilles in a modern context. Or describe how neural networks work. There are a lot of great resources and platforms out there for mapping and diagramming ideas and problems. Lucidchart and Coggle are both good for concept mapping in particular, and both have limited free subscriptions. Both Miro and Mural are great digital whiteboard spaces with a number of built-in templates for mapping, for storyboarding, wireframing, etc. They are also both excellent for collaborative work. There are many more out there, and we encourage you to find others. In summary, strategies like concept maps, storyboards, and the Lotus Blossom Matrix are great tools for reflecting on prior understanding, for organizing thoughts and relationships, for generating new ideas and questions, allowing students to more clearly communicate their ideas, thoughts, and information without the barriers that sometimes are posed by linear writing, and for integrating new concepts with prior knowledge.